Why does it seem like every book nowadays is written with first-person narration? Does everybody suddenly hate the third-person POV? Is it too dense now? Too difficult to understand? Are novels actually getting simpler and dumbed down? Is this supposed shift toward first person to blame for that? Is there even a semblance of truth in any of those questions? And if so, then what does that say about the state of the modern novel? That's what I want to talk about today. The growing prevalence of the first-person perspective in novels, a trend myself and others have noticed over the past several years, probably even longer than that. Hello, I'm Maddie and welcome to Salted Latte, a place where I like to dissect and explore popular language and prose. By watching this, you're now considered a cool cat, so congratulations. If you're interested in this sort of thing, I'd love it if you liked and subscribed. And make sure you stick around till the end of the video for our Writer's Circle segment where you cool cats send in your writing and I pick one for us to comb through and talk a little bit about. Hold on a second. I'm just getting word of something. What's that? They've been nominated? My goodness, yes, you have been nominated to join my Patreon. Congratulations. Head on over there, you can choose your cat and your price point. I've got 3 tiers to try and keep things as accessible for as many of you as possible. You'll get all these videos early and ad-free, and you'll also get the ability to submit your writing for our Writer's Circle segment I was just talking about. And as more people join, I'd love to add even more perks like the group chat feature so we can all talk about our writing projects and the books, TV shows, just whatever we're currently consuming. So the link for that will be in the description below. But right now, I think it's time for a bit of investigative journalism. I couldn't find any data online about the amount of books published each year divided into point of view categories, so I decided to do a little bit of boots on the ground journalism and explore for myself. AKA, I kind of just wanted an excuse to go to Barnes & Noble. But before that trip, I wanted to take stock of my own book collection to see if maybe that would also give us a little bit of insight into this suspected pendulum swing toward the first-person POV. I counted, and of all the 16 fiction books that I personally own that are published within the past 15 or so years, 9 of them are written in first-person perspective. 5 out of these 9 are romances, and then 7 out of the 16 are written in the third-person narration. And out of this third-person narration group, just 3 out of these 7 are romances. 2 of those 3 being from the same series, Heated Rivalry, so really only 2 separate authors writing in third-person romance. So within my most recent collection, I do have more first-person POV books, although I've come to realize that I really don't own that many recently published works compared to my collection of older works, interestingly enough, or what you could consider the classics. And proportionally, I also have more first-person POV romance novels versus third-person POV romance novels, about 55% versus about 42%. First-person narration is slightly higher, as you can see. And I am singling out romances here because as you'll see later on, the romance genre seems to be having the biggest push toward first-person POV in recent years, perhaps more so than most other fiction genres. I'm generally not a huge romance reader, so maybe my collection isn't the best one to examine for data for that. Honestly, the biggest thing that going through my novels really taught me was that I need to dust my bookshelf way more often. My allergies were going crazy. But off to Barnes & Noble we go. I thought they would be the best place to look compared to an indie bookstore because Barnes & Noble is huge. They carry literally everything, which is kind of what I needed for this. I wanted to be able to scan through as many books as possible before my eyes gave out, and that's exactly what I attempted to do. At Barnes & Noble, I stuck to just looking at the general fiction area and the romance books area, which still covered a lot of ground. In terms of general fiction, there were definitely some first-person narration books scattered amongst the shelves, but overall it seemed fairly balanced. I definitely had to stand there for a bit and search for them versus my experience in the romance section. There was a ton of first-person narration in this Barnes & Noble romance section. it definitely seemed to dominate that genre. I flipped through many romance books, as many as I could, before I was worried people were gonna start staring at me. Some of them scared me, to be honest, like thematically they did. I didn't realize that so many of them would have like page-long trigger warning lists in the beginning with the oddest things listed in them, but anyways, most of them were written with first-person narration. For example, I counted all the novels in this row pictured here, and 21 out of the 38 books, not including the repeated ones, were all first-person, and that's over half of them. I'd say that is a pretty fair reflection of what I was noticing overall in the romance section. Obviously, this is anecdotal data from only one bookstore. Although Barnes & Noble is a chain, even on their website they say each store carries a slightly different variety of books. However, I don't imagine them varying too greatly in terms of differences. Again, just some personal experience speaking here, but I've gone to multiple Barnes & Nobles in multiple different areas, and from what I've seen, they generally carry pretty similar options, or at least pretty comparable options, especially when it comes to what's popular, and romance is definitely popular right now. It would have been nice if I could have spent like all day there flipping through books and tallying up POVs, but that definitely would have been annoying to the workers and the other customers that were there. It was kind of busy that day, so I did what I could with the spare time that I had. And no, I was not able to leave without getting at least one book. I picked up Dracula because I've actually never read it before, even though I love Frankenstein and gothic fiction, as you all probably know by now. And coincidentally, Dracula is written in the first-person POV through a series of letters, so even though the narration style is popular now, it has been used in storytelling throughout history, even all the way back in the 1800s. Surprisingly, when I began researching for this video topic, I couldn't find a ton of people talking about it online outside of like Reddit forums. That's a big reason why I ended up asking you all for your thoughts and opinions, which we will get into a little later on. There was one other creator I found that has talked about the recent rise in first-person narration, and that was Alyssa Matesic with her video, The Real Reason Every Novel is in First Person Now. And I want to talk about one of the arguments that she brings up because I think it provides a lot of insight, and I also think Alyssa offers a realistic perspective on this topic, given her career in publishing. I'll definitely link her video down below if you'd like to check it out. One of the big arguments she makes is that there is an assumption that because of the genre's first-person POVs gaining popularity mainly in romance, which is one of the biggest genres out there right now, that first-person narration becomes quote-unquote less complex and less respectable than third-person narration does. The limitations of writing from first-person POV don't mean that it's the worst choice. Skilled authors use those limitations to their benefit to add something to the story that they couldn't via the third person. And Alyssa brings up The Great Gatsby as one of many examples, with the funneling of the narrative through Nick being integral to the telling of the story. First person can actually be harder to implement effectively because you have to maintain the voice of this character for it to be believable, not filter everything through an omniscient narrator. Alyssa also suggests that first person narration might be becoming more popular because writing is one of the few forms to be able to capture that intimacy so well in a way that visual media like film and TV cannot. And I actually think this is a great point that I had never considered before watching her video. So much of our media nowadays is consumed via a screen of some sort, either watching actors converse with each other at movie theaters or on TV, or watching someone address you as the audience on your phone via apps like TikTok and YouTube. It is incredibly difficult to capture the feeling of being in someone's head through that medium versus through the medium of writing. The first person perspective may be popularized in books, but I'd say it's fairly unique compared to other art forms in terms of expression. The real problem, according to Alyssa, isn't the techniques used, including narration, rather it's in the quality of execution of these techniques, which I 1000% agree with. I also want to talk about the article that she references throughout her video to make these points, which is from Slate magazine, and it was published just a few months ago, actually, I think in March, and it's titled Romance Books: Why Are So Many Novels Written in First Person and Not Third Person? Something in this article that Alyssa didn't talk about in her video was the influence that fan fiction could possibly have on this shift toward the first person perspective. For example, quote, "A number of the most successful authors in romance got their start in fan fiction, as in the vast morass of derivative works spun off from established franchises and self-published and disseminated via platforms like Archive of Our Own, the promised land of fanfic." Books like The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood, the After series, even 50 Shades of Grey, and Heated Rivalry all started out as fan fictions before being picked up by traditional publishing. Many fan fictions are written in the first person, with the self-insert style being among one of the most popular, where the reader literally inserts themselves into the story as the main character. The Slate article continues, quote, "These days in particular, a lot of DNA is shared between these two modes of publishing, traditional and fan-made, with the barriers that once divided them blurring to the point of becoming effectively indistinguishable. As publishing houses scoop up beloved fics, slap a new coat of 'we changed all the copyrightable identifiers, you can't sue us' paint on them, and sell the remixed results for $20.99 a piece. If fan fiction asserts the primacy of personal wish fulfillment, then you could argue that this new wave of romance novel serves and reflects the same purpose," end quote. Personally, I wouldn't say we're at the point where self-publishing and fan fiction have leveled the playing field necessarily compared to the traditional publishing route. You can definitely find success in those non-traditional writing spaces, whether your version of success is just getting your work out there or eventually landing a book deal. But because the barrier to entry with fan fiction is much lower, it's way easier to get lost in a sea of millions of other people also trying to have their stories seen. But with that being said, I definitely think it's possible that fan fiction writing styles and conventions have had a degree of influence on traditionally published books in recent years. I suspect a lot of that has to do with the growth of online communities like Book Talk and BookTube, as well as the increased awareness and acceptance of fan fiction and fandom in general in popular culture. I think a lot of romance readers also share overlap in fandom spaces, thus their experience with fan fiction could potentially shape what they expect out of a traditionally published book, whether they realize it or not. There are definitely lots of elements to consider with this first-person POV topic, much to think about here. Now, you all, my cool cats, also had a lot of insights about the rise in popularity of first-person narration. I posed these questions under the community tab on my channel. Why do you think so many books nowadays are written in the first person, and do you have a preferred POV to read or write in? And now I want to discuss some of your thoughts and your theories. Many of the responses, I feel, can be grouped into 3 distinct categories. The first one we're going to talk about is the fanfiction angle, actually, because you all pointed out before I even noticed that connection. Crystallized 4836 says, "I prefer reading and writing in third person, but that's mainly because I read and write fanfiction as well as original fiction. In fanfiction, first person has a very strong association with self-inserts, so everybody who isn't into that tends to avoid it." And Kitty3 Cheshire says, "Because of the YN kind of fanfic style, it's more relatable." So it seems like first person in fanfiction can be comforting or maybe nostalgic for some readers who grew up reading YN related stories, but at the same time, because of its close connection with fanfiction writing, as these commenters and others pointed out, it can also have kind of the adverse effect as well. Readers might be put off by first-person POV because it might be uncomfortable or juvenile to them. And I don't mean juvenile in the sense that fanfiction stories are immature, far from it really. I've read plenty of fanfictions that I think are better crafted than some published books I've spent upwards of $30 on. What I mean is that a lot of people first got into the fandom and fanfiction space as teenagers. This is especially true for the target demographic of romance books today. Women in their 20s and 30s and upwards who were once kids that were growing up alongside the internet and sites like AO3 and Tumblr. And fanfiction is for everyone, but I think it still has that association with youth culture, specifically teenage girls and young adult women. A lot of people also brought up the argument of writing in first person being easier, both in the belief of that sentiment and also in an effort to debunk it. Bacon Cheeseburger 22 says, I feel like we can mention in this conversation the fast fashion writing, where books are meant to capitalize on a trend rather than being a passion project, and how it's much easier to get away with not fully developing characters through a first-person perspective. Like, you can easily write a story in first person and blame plot holes or simple writing on just having a limited perspective. Sun Chin says, maybe it has something to do with how a lot of readers are starting to really rely on simpler / more casual prose that's more in line with how normal people talk. It's easier to justify that kind of prose style if you're writing from first person as opposed to third person. I definitely think other people think that the limited perspective of first person narration makes telling a story simpler. However, I believe that the limitations of first person means you have to be even more on top of your character's development and consistency, not just in their story arc, but literally in their speech, their internal thoughts, the ways in which they perceive other characters and the world around them. I actually mentioned this in another video. I said something along the lines of, I have this theory that first person POV in books is becoming more and more popular because authors think it's an easier way to hook you into a story, which can be true in some cases, but not all of the time. Some authors, I do think, end up relying too heavily on the first person narration as a way to carry the reader through the story instead of actually taking the time to tell the story in the most effective way. And a lot of the opportunities for developing meaningful prose ends up being ignored when we go this route. Not all authors who write in first person do this, of course, but there's been enough to where I've just caught on to that little pattern maybe. Let me know if you've noticed this as well. And lastly, so many of you also mentioned book talk and the romance genre's influence on narration choices as well, that we touched on briefly with Alyssa's video and that Slate article. Andy Shepherd 2780 says, I never wrote in first person POV myself, neither did I read many of them. I'm more of a third person omniscient narrator. Then again, I'm in my mid-30s, and what I hear from younger people on book talk is that first person POV helps with immersion, more so when it's romantasy and the readers want to self-insert specifically. Lou6735 says, I've read a decent amount of good books in first person, so I'm going to discount the book talk worst offenders here and only talk about books I think are well written. First person provides an intimacy with the audience that certain genres of the story, particularly stories about coming of age, highly benefit from. Reading books like Hell's Heart or The Skin and Its Girl, I think first person has a very lean over and tell you the story vibe to it. It makes sense that it's a technique a lot of less skilled writers would want to imitate. I notice it also does one thing perfectly. It can mask the identity of the main character in ways third cannot. The Crane Husband is a good example. I feel like first person gets a lot of flack from readers who like to put on a pretense of media understanding, but who in truth spend more time on social media talking about books they don't respect than engaging with books they do. I think because first person seems to be gaining significant popularity in the romance genre, or in books that become popular in online spaces like book talk recommendations. Oftentimes, an overlap of both of those spaces. I think many people are quick to make the assumption that a book written from the first person POV is going to be of lower quality, whether that be via the prose itself, the story concept, flat characters, etc. And I feel like oftentimes that has more to do with the underlying misogyny, dare I say, toward women-dominated hobbies and spaces than it does with actual narration style preferences. Like these commenters say, there are plenty of well-written, acclaimed books that are written in the first person, and there have been for decades. It's only within the past 5 to 10 years maybe that we see people really critiquing the usage of first person perspective, which I hypothesize is not so coincidentally coinciding with the rise in online book spaces and quote-unquote book talk authors, which predominantly feature women in both respects, as the readers and as the writers. And that's not to say that some of these stories that blow up on social media shouldn't be critiqued or that they don't have flaws. A lot of the prose and plot issues that myself and others have commented on in these books are not necessarily the result of first-person narration though. Rather, the implementation of this point of view ends up exacerbating these problems with character development and sentence structure and descriptive language and whatever else. I touched on this a little bit near the end of my Colleen Hoover prose video about how no matter the quality of your writing, the genre that you write in impacts to a degree the seriousness with which some people will take you as an author. Because the romance genre has historically been dominated by a female audience, it ends up getting socially devalued and not viewed with the same seriousness as other genres like lit fic, for example, or maybe even sci-fi. People go into romances and romanticises expecting an easier read, something they could finish maybe within the day if they really wanted to. So when this genre starts to become synonymous with this certain kind of narrative packaging, single or dual first-person POV, then people start associating that narrative style with these perceived qualities of a romance book recommended to you 50 million times on TikTok. The last opinion I want to talk about comes from Jenna Blackmore Books, and she says, I think if authors are reading a lot of very similar work, or if publishers are picking up on a lot of similar work, the point of view is going to come across as very similar in a lot of new books. First person doesn't have to be overtly simple. For example, Jane Eyre has excellent prose and a first-person point of view, and The Outsiders effectively utilizes an informal style in first person to develop character and setting. So I don't think some people's idea of quote-unquote readers just want the bad, easy POV is the reason for it. But if what's popularly trending is first person and what publishers want right now is first person, and if what authors see is getting popular with readers as first person, it all contributes to first person's current popularity. I wonder if people are more disappointed in the homogeneity in popular books right now. No, it's homogeny. Wait, what is it? Homogeneity. I wonder if more people are disappointed in the homogeny of popular books right now than the POV itself. I think Jenna brings up such good points here. We see this so often when any kind of product or art form hits a certain point in its popularity cycle where people kind of get snobby about it, I think, as a way to differentiate themselves from the current norm. Like people who work under the assumption that this thing is getting pretty popular, so it must actually be bad or overrated or overhyped or whatever. I definitely think we are seeing some of that trickle into this first person narration discourse. And I definitely think you are onto something when you say, I wonder if people are more disappointed the sameness in popular books right now versus the actual POV itself. I think that far too many people are relying on a select group of people at the top of the bookish social media food chain to tell them what to read and to tell them what to like. I'm not saying that as a diss to the bigger book creators. You're allowed to like what you like and talk about and promote whatever stories you want. The bigger issue I'm trying to get at here is that I think people are so used to getting served recommendations now. It's like we're losing the art of branching out, of seeking out smaller creators, seeking out creators with different tastes than you, or just going to the bookstore, picking up a book and trying it out without knowing maybe every little detail about it. I do understand the appeal of waiting to purchase a novel until it gets your favorite creator's stamp of approval, because book prices these days are insane, and that's definitely a reason why it's harder for people to diversify what they're reading. But at the same time, you know what? To that I say, go to your local library, check out some books for free, and if you end up really liking one, you can go and purchase it for yourself to keep as your own copy. So there are other options. They just take a little bit more legwork and a little more brain power maybe than what people are wanting to do. I feel like I've kind of sprinkled my stance on the uptick in first-person narration, why it's come about, whether it's a good thing, a bad thing, or a thing we really shouldn't care that much at all about throughout my commentary on all of these other people's opinions. But I will just sort of sum it up here at the end. Honestly, in summary, I don't think it's a phenomenon we should particularly pay too much attention to, at least at face value. As long as the story is well executed, personally, I could care less what perspective you're writing in. But I do think this conversation is an interesting one to be had, in the sense that so many people do have such strong opinions about both first person and third person narration, and it is fascinating to connect dots and just to see what this says about the connotations we create in association with one POV choice versus the other. Congratulations, you made it to the end of the video. Here's a gold star. Well, almost. Now it's time for the Writer's Circle, a segment in which I select a writing submission from one of my lovely Patreon members and we discuss it. So let's dive into it. Since we're talking all about first person today, I thought it would be fun to show you guys a little example of my work, what I'm currently working on, which is a book that I'm currently in the revising stages for. I think I have a couple vlogs of my writing process up on the channel, like way back in the very beginning. And I also just posted a writing vlog the other day to my Patreon, so you can join and watch that if you like. This actually is a little excerpt of that because I talk about the first person perspective in that writing vlog as well, because coincidentally at the time that I'm working on this video, I also am revising this story to be stronger in the first person perspective. And this is the chapter that I'm currently working on. It's a little earlier in the story, so I thought I would show you maybe a couple examples of things that I've tweaked or changed to make this character's voice, this character's perspective stronger. At least that's my goal, that's my intention. I guess you can be the judge of that ultimately. But so this is a chapter titled Watermelon, and it's from my character Clementine's point of view. I have two point of views, Charlie's and Clementine's. They're like the two main characters, but this is Clementine's point of view, and I just want to make her voice stronger. She also has quite the internal dialogue. She's a little bit in her head, a little bit insecure, so she has a lot of internal thoughts going on too. So I wanted this chapter and all of her chapters to feel like we're more in her head than just like reading maybe more like third person narration text with first person pronouns. So I have on the left here the chapter before revisions, and then on the right here I have the chapter after revisions. I just thought we could go through like a few little places, show you some things that I changed and talk about maybe why. Just making it sound more like she is speaking to us and not necessarily this omniscient person. And literally what I have been doing so far is I've just been going through all of her chapters one by one, and I have the screen split like this, and I just start retyping on this side and then changing things as I see fit in the mode of typing. I don't know why, that just like gets my gears turning a little bit better. And also that way you can have multiple copies of your drafts and you can see the progress that you have made and you have like a log of all of your changes and when they've been changed. That can be super helpful, especially when you're working on a bigger writing project like a novel. I mean, this story is like 70,000 words. There's no way I could keep track of like all of the changes and revisions in just one document, you know? So like here, for example, this sort of opening paragraph beneath this dialogue, on the left it reads, I decided to invite Charlie over another afternoon this week with the sole intention of giving him back the shirt he abandoned from his prior visit. Somehow the balmy temperature and the glimpses I catch of him perusing up the sidewalk get the best of me. Instead, we end up relaxed near the end of the driveway, gnawing at slices of watermelon. Those sentences aren't bad. I don't hate them. Like, I don't think they're constructed terribly. And that is something that I definitely can struggle with when it comes to revising my own writing. And I think a lot of other people might struggle with as well, is like, you write this sentence or this couple of sentences and objectively it reads nicely. It looks nice, but maybe it's just not exactly what the story needs. And that can be hard to like delete this sentence you think is so beautiful and poetic and whatever, but you have to do what's best for the story. Sometimes you have to kill your darlings. That's a phrase you hear sometimes in the writing sphere. But I rewrote it over here to just feel a little bit more like, kind of like a person was saying it. And I did that with sentence structure and, you know, adding these little blurbs of her internal thoughts. She has a lot of voices in her head. So now it says, I decide to invite Charlie over another afternoon this week with the sole intention of giving him back the shirt he abandoned from his prior visit. That sentence is pretty much the same, I think. This is when we get a little bit of some changes. But the balmy temperature, the glimpses I catch of him perusing up the sidewalk. Focus, Clem. Except I can't. Not on anyone besides him or anything except the slices of watermelon we gnaw at in the driveway. I just like that now the second half of this paragraph is kind of, you can see in the grammar a little bit her getting lost in thought by this other character, and then she interjects herself with her internal monologue being like focus. That just feels a little more personable to me. Of course I had to add an M dash because I am a proponent of the M dash, and I will use them in any place that I can because I want to reclaim them from AI. Then of course, as you can maybe tell, I don't know, I kind of use the descriptions of the watermelon and her just being really entranced by the way that this other character, Charlie, is consuming this watermelon as sort of a mirror for their conversation, and also the fact that Clementine is maybe a little prematurely obsessed with Charlie. So that's also what's happening in this chapter. Then I made little tweaks too, but mostly I was just focused on the perspective. So it's like they're having this conversation. If you could exist as an entirely different person in an entirely different place, who do you think you'd be? But there's also like this whole other, dare I say, one-sided conversation with Clementine happening like in the subtext and the description, which I think is fun. So this is a point in the chapter where they like both reach for more fruit at the same time and they like bump hands, and Clementine, she's like freaking out a little bit. I just added a couple things to make it feel more her, like this little O when they first touch hands. Like it's a little startling and overwhelming to her. And then, you know, he's still talking about whatever alternate universe versions of themselves they would be, and all she's thinking about is, you know, their hands touching, even though she's able to like maintain composure on the outside because she's still like trying her best to move along the conversation, but internally there's such a contrast, which I enjoy. So yeah, that's really all I wanted to show you. Maybe less of some advice this time and more of just like me sharing that I also go through similar processes of editing and revision, just trying my best to write a cool story. But I do hope this was at least interesting to see a little peek into, or maybe like you did find something helpful out of this. I'd love it if you liked and subscribed to the channel, and also hype this video if you are able to. I think that's only something you can do on mobile devices, I learned, but it is something to give me a little boost in the algorithm if you'd be so obliged to do that. Like I said at the beginning of this video over here at Salted Latte, I love to dive into and dissect language and prose through all kinds of medium, writing, aesthetics, other forms of media, really anything I'm interested in at the moment. Let me know if you enjoyed this one or if you have any other suggestions for future videos. I'm all ears. I do also have an ASMR channel. You can check me out. Okay. What happened to hello? How are you? I do have a more like artsy, creative ASMR vibes channel as well. You can check out if you're into that. I'll have it linked below along with my Patreon if you'd like to support me in that way as well. Like I said at the beginning, all of these videos plus my other channel's videos are posted over there early and ad-free. You'll also get the ability to send me your snippets of your writing for my writer circle segment, so that's pretty cool too. I think pretty good deal if you ask me. And as my Patreon grows, so will the ability to use group chat features like our writer circle group chat where you can all talk and discuss your writing projects or your reading lists or whatever together. I think that would be fun. I literally have 2 sentences left, but that's only possible if people join, so join if you can. That's all I have to say for now. I'll talk to you all soon. Goodbye.